Good morning, welcome to the Friday edition of Nigeria Now, showing on your digital first Pan-African news network, TOS Television. This morning, there are some stories that are making the front pages of the newspapers in Nigeria. We begin with the Guardian newspaper. The big story is Ige'sMurder. I'm willing to go to court, says Soyinka. We have three riders. The first, Falana offers free legal service, says Soyinka exercises freedom of expression. APC Buhari insensitive. Carlos should have rewarded Omishore with envoy to Ukraine. And the third, I never campaigned for Buhari, only asked Nigerians to vote out Jonathan in 2015. That's on page 6 of the Guardian paper. From the very top, police arrest 3 armed robbers at Toyota bus stop, recover arms. And that's on page 8 of the Guardian. Mixed reactions as court upholds Ayade's defection. That's on page 3. And then just the big story there on the picture of the day, Super Eagles, a failure foretold in Cameroon. That story is on page 4 and 5 of the Guardian newspaper. Blackout on Lagos International Airport Road raises security concerns. That story is on page 20 of the Guardian. And on page 28, again, vandals attack Bayelsa pipeline, disrupt Agip's gas export. On page 29, gunmen kill 2, injure others in Plateau IDP camp. And then families of kidnapped train passengers protest government inaction as another victim dies of gunshot injuries. And of course, that's on page 6 of the Guardian newspaper. On the Punch newspaper, the big story is National Assembly fights Malami back, appeals Electoral Act judgment. That is on page 2. We have 3 riders. The first, President Buhari's ministers await final verdict, puts 2023 ambitions on hold. The second, Lawan gives aides planning to contest ultimatum to resign. Omoagege's men comply. And the third rider says, Cross River APC asks Ayade men to resign. Bauchi governor orders aides to step aside. And then from the very top, we see SIM NIMC's enrollment of Nigerians falls by 45% in 3 months. That is on page 22 of the Punch newspaper. Then we see Buhari gets RMAFC's new revenue sharing formula state. Local government gets more. And then train victims' families protest the Transportation Ministry's briefing. That is on page 28. On page 13, Soyinka says, I await court action over comment on Ige's murder. Underneath the pictures of the day, 2022 budget deficit jumps to 7.35 trillion naira. Buhari to borrow 965 billion naira. That story is on page 21 of the Punch. And then, U.S. Senate confirms first black woman for Supreme Court. U.S. Senate confirms first black woman for Supreme Court. That is on page 8. And Makinde declares interest in seeking re-election. That is on page 9. And then, after denial, Lagos appoints Oluomo head of Parks Garages Committee. That is on page 7 of the Punch newspaper. We move over to the Nigerian News Direct. The big story is debt profile. Federal government to finance budget deficit with new borrowings. As experts predict, Nigeria's bankruptcy before end of 4th quarter. That is on page 2 of the Nigerian News Direct. Then we see Mass Transit Abiodun unveils Wi-Fi enabled buses, says water taxis coming. That is on page 3. Sela Gas Commission's refill station gets support from NCDMB. That is on page 4 of the Nigerian News Direct. And federal government to redesign Lagos-Calabar rail corridor. Of course, that story is on page 2 of the paper. And APC primaries, no fixed date yet, says National Publicity Secretary. That is on page 23 of the Nigerian News Direct paper. On the Nation, we see a story that's been shown on all the newspapers this morning, and that is a dark train. Families of abducted passengers protest. We have 3 riders. The first, my expectant sister husband with terrorist. And then the second, protesting pastors seek bombing of bandit. And then the third, defense headquarters to Nigerians, don't despair. That is on page 4 of the Nation newspaper. From the very top, mass redeployment and please see peace for Edo, Imo, others. And then Ondo Governor Akeredolu not ill in Germany. That is on page 27. Then on page 7, UBA records 153 billion naira profit before tax. Then underneath the paper right there, we see Lagos appoint MC Oluomo, retired AIG Odumosun, 23 others, park managers. That is on page 2 of the Nation newspaper. On the Daily Trust, the big story is pressure mounts on Pinnick to resign over Qatar 2022 failure. 3 riders: the first, he ought to have resigned long ago. The second, Senate summons embattled president, sports minister. And the third, 10 ambition in jeopardy. That is on page 4 of the Daily Trust newspaper. From the very top, Buhari writes reps 965.42 billion naira fresh loan. We see that story on other newspapers and also on the Daily Trust for this morning. And the next one, defection, no provision to sack Governor Ayade, deputy, says court. Then just underneath the picture of the day, the newly licensed Baba Ahmed University Sharada campus candidate is the picture number 1. And then beside the picture number 2, RMA FC reduces federal government allocation to 45.17%, increases state, local government areas. Then Federal High Court bars journalists, public from terrorism trials. And then just underneath that, Kwara community chief nabbed over rape, murder of 2 women. All of the stories is on the Daily Trust newspaper for this morning. On the business day, the big story is petrol generator demand spikes on high diesel price. We have a couple of stories on that paper. Firms director straight 45 billion naira own shares in first quarter. Lagos new terminal idle 2 weeks after opening. Then we see besides that, I've never been scared of Alex Ferguson, says Patrice Evra. That story is on page 14 and 19 of the business day. The Nigerians converse change in voting pattern in 2023. And then Lagos-Abeokuta Expressway inflicts more pain on businesses, commuters. And the last newspaper this morning is the Blueprint newspaper. And from the very top, 30 years after, RMAFC proposes new revenue formula, state, local government favored. And the writer says, we await outcome of constitution review, says Buhari. The big story is as Autumn Committee's report on zoning hangs, crisis looms, chieftain drags PDP Atiku to court. We have a couple of writers there. The first says, want ex-VP barred from presidential primaries, committee's report jettisoned. The second, party adjusts timetable, extends sale of nomination forms. The third writer says, urges UN support for INEC on electronic transmission of result. And the fourth, I have no disagreement with IU, Suswam Mark, says Autumn. And then the last writer says, ex-NAFDAC boss Ohe joins Benue Guba race. Ex-NAFDAC boss Ohe joins Benue Guba race. That's on page 9 of the Blueprint newspaper. Then we see one here. We are committed to securing Nigeria despite setbacks, says DHQ. And they say 51,114 terrorists so far surrendered. Then we see a story on defection. Court of Appeal upholds Ayade's mandate. That is on page 5 of the Blueprint newspaper. Then on the last headlines, just on the bottom of the newspaper, we see failed MFBs, NDIC deploys platform to fast-track depositors' reimbursement. That is on page 22. On page 19, NIS recruitment, court acquits Abamoro, convicts ex-PAM secretary. The page 22 says shareholders' returns boosted as Zenith Bank pays 97.33 billion naira dividend. And page 8, Nigeria lost $1.5 billion in 3 months to oil theft, vandalism, says Kyari. And then Buhari tasks new APC chair Adamu to be fair, firm. That's on page 5. And then on page 23, SS3 students develop technology to curb railway attacks in Nigeria. That is on Blueprint newspaper. These are the headlines for the newspapers for today. Of course, you can also stay updated on our website, www.tostvnetwork.com. And our social media handle is at TOSTV Network on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. Make sure you like, subscribe, and also follow us so you do not miss out on any important information from Nigeria and across Africa. Thank you for joining us today. Again, we come your way again next week on Monday. My name is Merciful Ajinomo. Have a wonderful weekend.